So, I'm glad that I feel bad when I live a less principled life or when I neglect my prayer life. You know, it's kind of weird. Every time I have a consistent prayer life, I just become consistently more happy. But yet I still choose to neglect it sometimes for days or even weeks. I don't know quite why I do that. You know, somehow when I was a little kid, I'm sure I touched something that was hot. And I realized, right, just be careful, don't touch hot things again. It imprints itself. But somehow in the spiritual life, sometimes I can get lazy and not pray for a long time. And then I start to feel distant from God and I feel less happy. But I wish that feeling of less happy would imprint itself on me so that I really felt a desire to reconnect with God every day in prayer. But I'm stupid like that. I don't always. So, yeah, I'm trying to condition myself in that way. So, yeah, I'd like to talk about being stoic. I don't know if you know that word, but I like that word a lot. In 1 Corinthians, for 13:11, Paul said, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I reasoned like a child, I thought like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." So what do you think that means? I think he's talking about just maturity, you know. Yeah, we have expectations about our friends, our family, our church, our organization, or even God himself. And when things don't go the way we want, we sometimes, you know, take our ball and go home, or we detach. But our people, you know, so many people have left our church because maybe they expected it to be perfect. You know, they thought, well, the Messiah's here, and we've got God on our side and divine principle. But they see so many things going wrong, even, you know, in the leadership of our church and even in true family, and they completely lost their faith. I've heard of whole families, you know, because of one thing going wrong, they just get so disillusioned, and they just leave the church. Well, not so much leave the church is the problem, but they detach their faith and their engrafted relationship with true parents. And I think the problem is their expectation. When I was a kid, I saw the movie Star Wars in the cinema on the original release date, so you know how old I am. That was like 77, I think, so maybe I was 12 or 13. But I didn't enjoy it. And the reason is because I'd seen so much hype about it on TV, and so many people were talking about it. I expected the impossible, something truly amazing. I came out with the impression of it's just some guy running around the desert, and then there was like a scene in space, and then he was in this crappy-looking spaceship. And, you know, I didn't enjoy it that much, not because it wasn't a great film, but because my expectation was just so high. And later I saw the movie RoboCop. I don't know if you've seen that. But just before seeing that movie, I'd seen a really cheesy B sci-fi movie, and I thought RoboCop was going to be just like that. Actually, RoboCop's an awesome movie. It's got a lot of economic, social commentary in it. And it's very well made. And I came out of that movie on cloud nine. And both of those experiences were tempered strongly by my expectation. And so sometimes when we expect something to be greater than it possibly can be, even when we get something good, we might feel a bit depressed, like we lost something. And then if we don't have such a high expectation and we have something that's only moderately good, we can feel more inspiration. So our inspiration isn't necessarily correlated to the result. Sometimes it's strongly influenced by our expectation. And in the case of valuation, I realized when I joined the church, I heard Father said you can be perfect within 6 months. And I kind of was a bit, you know, I was 19, I was a bit full of myself, so I thought, yeah, I'll go for that record. But, you know, fast forward to like 4 or 5 years later, I didn't feel any more spiritually grown at all. And I'd done MFT and gone to America and all this kind of stuff. And I started to dawn on me that it's really, really hard to grow spiritually. In fact, it's all you can do not to go down rather than up. Sometimes I use the metaphor of it's like you wake up in a car that's on a hill that's rolling backwards, and the first thing you've got to do is get out and get to the back and try to stop it rolling down. But actually, you spend a long time just slowing it down and before you can even move forward. So, you know, as we get older, your body's desires and everything gets more mature, so you come under more assault from our fallen nature. And so it's not necessarily true that we can just start just going forward and onwards and upwards, growing spiritually. So yeah, I felt disappointed after some years because I didn't think I'd grown much at all. But then I had a realization that even if I make a huge amount of effort and I only get a tiny bit of spiritual growth, actually how I value that spiritual growth and that increased closeness to God can also determine how I feel about it, the result. Maybe when I first joined the church and I kind of liked the idea of being closer to God and spiritually growing, but when I'd worked so hard for so many years and I didn't feel much better, I'm sure I was a little bit improved, but I just felt disappointed and maybe depressed by it. But actually, as I grew older, I grew to learn that any improvement, any extra closeness to God has almost infinite value. And so how we value those kind of things can also influence our level of enthusiasm and inspiration. And so I feel there's a mood in our world movement, a kind of a bit of a dispirited move. People have got their own happy families and relationships, but we've had so many disappointments and we haven't, set the world on fire. When First Gen first joined, they really thought, we don't need to think about the future because within 10 years, the Pope and everybody, the presidents will all join the church. But actually, we feel kind of embattled. And I know a lot of people kind of just detach or even feel not comfortable associating themselves with our movement because it's got such a bad reputation. And a lot of it, it's deserved. But actually, I feel differently. I feel that that itself, the difficult state of our movement itself, is a confirmation of the principle. We had a kind of an arrogant state of mind that because we've got the Messiah and because we've got the principle, we don't need to apply the principle. Because, we're doing God's will, so God will make success anyway. But actually, God is incredibly fair, and so is the principle. So the fact that our movement is struggling, yesterday we had the symposium about the Channel Guk, and a lot of people in Chislehurst, they gave input about it. And it was great because they were giving input about, what we're not quite doing right and what we can adjust to make our movement more vibrant, into a church that has a big outreach and that a lot of people are joining. And to me, that was really inspiring because even though we're acknowledging there's problems, we can take responsibility for the solution. And so I was dwelling on the reason why our movement isn't on fire and changing the world. We had the Messiah around for 90 years. And one reason I thought was the quality of synthesis. When Jesus came, he would engraft with the Jewish people. It's a kind of synthesis, And if you look at the way the principle works or even the way science works, every higher order of thing is a result of a synthesis. You have quality constituent parts, they come together. The fall itself was a result of unprincipled synthesis. Adam and Eve were supposed to first purify themselves and become of the highest quality, close to God, then synthesize, and the family that came from that would be heavenly. And so in our case, in our movement, there was supposed to be a synthesis between True Father and all the leading lights of Korean society, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Confucianists, the intellectuals, all the human rights people. And then together, all those high-quality people would understand Father much more deeply than most of the people who actually joined. And they would be able to translate his message to other people, and not language translator, but explain it. And in the same way, that camp of highest quality people would interface with all the great quality people from Japan. And then when the Easterners finally came to the West, who would they interface with? They would interface with the great people, today's versions of St. Paul or John the Baptist, maybe people like Nicky Gumbel in HTB, people that have theological training and amazing spiritual development and spiritual confidence and power, so that it's the East and West would cross-pollinate and educate each other and become something greater than the whole. So that when one side got something wrong, some interpretation of something wrong, maybe somebody from the East, they didn't quite understand some of the deep things that people from a 4,000 year of Judeo-Christian history had learned, the people from the West, the members that interface with them, would be able to love them and educate them and teach them their point of view and vice versa. And that would be the result of two quality constituent parts creating a synthesis that would create an incredibly powerful movement. But the truth is that in Korea and in the West, all those leading lights of people with great breeding and education and spiritual power, and from a long history of being close to God, they didn't join the church. For whatever reason, they turned their back. People like me joined the church instead. And sometimes I'm a bit full of myself, and I think I'm a bit awesome. But actually, I know I'm not the kind of quality, that kind of person. I can't go to the government places and other places, and I can't convince them to give Father a chance. Just like in the time of Jesus, Jesus needed people like John the Baptist and St. Paul to be his ambassadors. But instead, he got illiterate fishermen and prosies to be honest. He was surrounded by people like that. And as you can see in the Bible, when they approached religious figures and establishment figures, they weren't of the quality that could convince them. But in the same way, the people that joined our movement, they have beautiful hearts. All your parents are amazing people. They got really beautiful hearts. But most of us first gen that joined the church, we were like, I don't know if you're familiar with the wedding banquet parable in the Bible. Jesus talks about the king has a wedding banquet for his son, and he invites all the noble people from the town, and nobody turns up. So instead he sends his servant out to invite all the beggars. And Jesus was actually insulting his own disciples by telling that, because he was saying, I've got you rather than the people that I really need to help me out. But that's a reality. I don't, if Father described me like that, Father and people have described members as being like, you're like garbage. When I was 21, it was difficult to hear that kind of thing. But actually it's true in my own assessment of myself compared to the kind of person God needs. I mean, that's actually true, And I'm old enough now that I can just acknowledge that, and I'm glad I can, because then I can think, yeah, I've got room for improvement. And so, but it's also a tragedy. It's a tragedy that that the people that joined our movement, they were great in many senses, but they weren't the quality or caliber of people that God needed. And so the synthesis that happened as a result wasn't the same kind of synthesis. So there was lots of misunderstandings in our church, which led to, not the best atmosphere. Yesterday at the symposium, I gave one example. In our church, we teach in Divine Principle about the subject-object relationship. And it's only after 30 years in the church and, a lot of education from great teachers like William Haynes that I've come to understand it a bit more, and also how it was misapplied. For example, we teach that the subject initiates and the object responds. So the subject gives love, energy in some form, but usually love, and the object returns beauty. And but the way that's applied is really important to do it with finesse. When we talk about the object returning beauty, we tend to think of it as something, it's just a nice result. The subject giving love is the important part. But actually, the returning beauty is no less important than female is to male or external is to internal. It's really, really important for the process to be sustainable, because when the subject gives love or energy, the subject depletes itself, or himself or herself. Father talks about God completely emptying himself. So I see the seventh day when God rested as not just being some metaphor for God stopped, but actually God really emptied himself out, and so he needed to regenerate. And so when the subject does that, the subject also just depletes their energy, and the subject has to regenerate their energy. But it's not magic, it doesn't just happen. And Father once said something amazing. He said, God has lots of love, like a reservoir of love, but it's trapped inside. God himself is unable to access it. It has to be accessed or stimulated by the beauty of the object. And so when the subject gives out love, then the object receives that love and then manifests beauty. Just like when your parents love you, you grow and you get educated and you become a quality person of good heart. And when your parents see that, they feel inspired and it energizes them to continue giving love. So for one example would be in the South London, they had a desire to have a church center, a peace embassy. So they worked hard, and they sacrificed, and they gave labor and money, and they even did outreach and capitalized on their relationships with other communities to get some help. And so, they gave out a lot as a subject in that project. But when they see their embassy, their peace embassy, and they enjoy it, they feel joyful and the activities that go on there. And they don't feel like they lost something because they gave out. They feel regenerated, fulfilled by that. But if we have subjects give out energy, but there's no beauty returning, it leads to a depressed state. So, for example, the way this principle was applied in our church for so many years was that members would be asked to sacrifice and give out energy and love and usually money, especially the poor Japanese members. But that energy given out would always disappear into an insatiable black hole of providential need. And no beauty would return, not because it wasn't a worthy project, but because the project was either too abstract or the fruits were too distant in the future. And so the problem is, if the beauty doesn't return to the subject, then it's hard for the subject to continue giving out and regenerating energy. The desire to give out is easy, but how to regenerate energy. So it's important to apply principles like this subject-object give-and-take action in a way that will ensure the sustaining of it. So That's why doing local things in your community, in a way, is a lot better because you can see the results and you can feel inspired by it to keep going. And the thing is, when this principle was, you could say, misapplied or applied with less finesse, there wasn't many people in our first-gen movement that could stand up and say, you know what, this doesn't work. It sounds noble to sacrifice and all that, but it doesn't work. But if the people who should have interfaced with True Father from the West did, they could have used their intellect and their wisdom and understanding and actually just done a tweak or added some finesse to this process, and it would have just it would have manifest this principle in a completely different way, and our movement would have been, an amazing place. It's still an amazing place. When I look around our movement and I look at members first gen and second gen, I just see the most incredible people, actually. But I sometimes feel we're less than the sum of our parts. When I go to other churches or other organizations, I never see such a high ratio of just amazing people of all different types in personality and quality and education and skills. So when I look at our movement, I see just an ability to set the world on fire. I always say we should have 100,000 members in Britain right now. Sounds like a big number, but it's actually not that big. Just have a few hundred people in each town. It's not that big, but we also misapplied the principle in witnessing. We just thought about the prepared person all the time. And we ignored anybody who was interested in our movement who wasn't ready to go straight onto MFT within a few weeks. And so, we could have invested in a different way. And so I think going forward, it's important that I know it's not like I'm talking to you and thinking, God, you all look depressed, because you all look really happy and energized. But, you're young and we're enjoying our lives and we're growing and having relationships. So, yes, that's beautiful. But as far as the goals of our project are concerned, the project of God's providence, I don't think we feel that much hope, because we not only see some resistance in the world, but we see massive disunity in the true family and problems in our movement. But actually, I think we have to take ownership of that, and that's why yesterday's symposium was so amazing, because that's what people were talking about. They were talking about how to restructure our church, the way leaders are chosen, or the way that there's accountability and transparency and professionalism, and then we create a vibrant movement, and then we support each other. And so in the past, we've been a little bit passive because we just thought, well, we've got the Messiah, we just do what he says and it'll have great results. But actually, it turns out that's not always the case. And I think it's important that we take responsibility for our God's providence, our providence actually, and that we learn how to apply the principle with finesse, and that we think about, especially in the UK, we can think locally, right? Because the more we do in the UK, the more we'll see returning beauty and we'll be inspired by it. So, we can go out and do missions and things. So I want to encourage you to, even though we see struggles in our movement, to actually have hope and have energy and have ambition. And at the same time, even if we do some little improvement, just value that incredibly. Because I honestly believe that our movement can just become the greatest place, the greatest church or the greatest movement in the UK that people will just be flocking to. People have mostly forgot all the negative stuff about our movement because the media went through the stage of attacking us onto ignoring us. And so it's like a fresh start. So, I just want to encourage you to have hope and to get engaged in the departments of leaders and in the councils and in all those kind of things, and assert your own ideas about what's the best way to do things. And don't be deterred by the feelings that, well, if I insist this, I'm going to look like I'm not unifying. So, sorry if this is a bit of a talk which is pointing about the errors of our movement, but I don't want to patronize you and come up here and just say, yeah, just rally you up. I actually think that we've got challenges in our movement, but actually we've also got opportunities, amazing opportunities. And I see here a bunch of people, also in our first gen, that could totally take over the world and save the world, if that's not too much of a cliche. So thanks for listening, and God bless you. Maybe I'll say a prayer to finish. Okay. Heavenly Father, we are children, and we're so lucky that we were born into a movement and into families that could meet the Messiah directly, and that we could know you. And honestly, Father, divine principle is such an amazing thing. We can study it all our lives and always be amazed by how much it can teach us about everything about life and about you. And applying the divine principle is a little bit different. We don't talk much in our movement about the application of divine principle, but it's not the same as just understanding it. And it's a challenge to work out, and we can enjoy that challenge. So, Father, please give us hope and energy and your love, and we're all enthusiastic about you and True Parents and our providence. And even if our movement's got some struggles, that's not completely unexpected. So let's just see that as a great opportunity for us to fix any problems and just to move forward. And we can create a movement among first gen and second gen and even third gen that can just become so vibrant, because when we know when we apply the principle, it always bears fruit. And so we can work on this and experiment and try different things and create a movement that's just the most amazing place that everybody in society wants to come to, because frankly, people in society, so many people are lost. They don't really have much options, and they try things, to take drugs and free sex and just hedonistic living, but they never feel fulfilled by it, Father, because the principle always works. And so when they come here and they see our movement, let's welcome them, and let's not just witness, but let's think how to make our movement a place where we feel confident to witness, because we feel confident to bring friends and show them what a great place this is. So please bless us, Father, and be with us. And through this week, Father, please be with all these princes and princesses of heaven. I feel this pray in the name of True Parents, our Jew.